He shouldn't have been standing there, not in that barren stretch of Route 17, not in the half-light before dawn when the Mojave Desert still held the heat from yesterday like burning coals hidden beneath the sand. A lone German shepherd puppy, ribs jutting, paws cracked from walking too far under a merciless sun, stood in the very center of the highway. He didn't run. He didn't whimper. He didn't even step aside. He faced the emptiness head-on, as if expecting someone specific to arrive. Not a ranger. Not a traveler. Someone. And when that someone finally rolled into view, it wasn't a rescuer in uniform or a desert patrol officer. It was a U.S. Marine whose eyes carried a silence deeper than the miles surrounding him, a man with a past he hadn't escaped and no one waiting for him back home. What followed wouldn't just save a life. It would rebuild one. This wasn't simply a story about survival, this was about loyalty that outlived pain, about a mother who fought even when broken, and a pup who refused to leave her behind. But before we begin, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. And if you've ever believed that sometimes angels come with fur instead of wings, tap subscribe. You won't want to forget this one. The desert that never whispered. In Painted Valley, nothing ever truly quieted. The wind didn't murmur like it did in gentler places, it screamed its presence, carrying grit so fine it found its way into teeth, eyelashes, and the folds of clothing. It was late spring in Southern California's high desert, the season when mornings hovered near freezing, but by midday the heat rose to a punishing triple-digit burn. The sky, still pale orange and soft around the edges, shimmered with the kind of mirages that made distant rocks dance. Shadows stretched across Route 17, long, twisted shapes sliced across the forgotten asphalt. Locals called this stretch Dead Man's Mile. Not because bodies had ever been found here, but because the land felt untouched by time or movement. Nothing changed. Nothing lived. Nothing lingered. Except today. The Marine who carried ghosts. Staff Sergeant Eli McCabe gripped the steering wheel of his dust-coated Humvee, knuckles brown from sun, scarred from years of work most people never saw. At 37, broad-shouldered and wiry, he looked older than his rank suggested. His face was carved by exhaustion and battles he didn't speak about. His steel-gray eyes held that hollow, distant look, the one soldiers carried when too many memories lived behind them. His skin, weather-beaten and creased, blended into the desert around him. His beard had turned salt gray too early, and though regulations no longer bound him strictly, the hair beneath his cap stayed clipped short, muscle memory from a life structured by rules. Eli looked like a man still at war, even in the quiet. He'd been deployed in Fallujah during the ambush that took 3 of his brothers in under 90 seconds. He had dragged Mason, his last surviving friend, through open fire for 50 yards before the man bled out against Eli's shoulder. The stain never washed out. Neither did the memory. Command sent him home after that, but only his body returned. His mind never fully left those streets of dust and screams. That's why he was out here now, not deployed, not stationed, just in a kind of supervised limbo. Painted Valley Marine Reserve Base kept a trailer open for soldiers who needed time, space, and silence. They called it sand therapy. Let the desert burn away the turmoil. Let the walking, sweating, waiting, and breathing reset the pieces inside. It didn't work. Not yet. His Humvee, stripped of tactical gear, now rattled like an old mule. Duct tape held the console together. A duffel bag sat in the passenger seat with a flask, an untouched journal, and the same flashlight his friend Mason had once gifted him. The batteries still hadn't been changed. A scratched Marine Corps insignia hung from the rearview mirror, swaying like a prayer the wind kept trying to answer. The storm arrives. The dust storm came without warning. One moment Eli watched the sun flirting with the ridgeline. The next, the world turned violent, sand sweeping sideways, visibility plummeting to mere feet. He slowed the vehicle, squinting at the windshield as grains smacked hard enough to sound like shrapnel. His breathing steadied. Training took over. Slow. Steady. Keep moving. Then, a shape. Small. Low. Dead center of the highway. Not running. Not retreating. Eli slammed the brakes. The Humvee skidded, rocked, and jolted to a stop. His heart pounded against his ribs. Grabbing the flashlight, he opened the door and stepped into the storm. Sand slapped his face. The wind yanked at his clothes. And there it was. A puppy. A German shepherd, maybe 4 months old. Emaciated. Fur clumped with dirt. Eyes sharp with fear, but not wild fear. Purposeful fear. The pup barked, hoarse, shredded by wind, but stood its ground. It didn't flee. It didn't cower. It watched him. Eli knelt, joints cracking, and slowly lifted the flashlight beam. The pup's amber eyes locked onto his own. He knew that look. Not hunger. Not madness. Desperation, with direction. You trying to tell me something? Eli muttered, his voice gravelly. The pup barked once, then rushed forward. Eli flinched, expecting teeth. Instead, the tiny creature grabbed his pant leg and tugged. Hard. Then released, trotted a few feet toward the desert's edge, and looked back. Oh, you've got to be kidding, Eli groaned. But somehow, his feet followed before his brain could argue. Led by a little warrior. The pup guided him off the road and into a shallow ravine carved by wind and time. Visibility was horrible, sand swirling, dust stinging, but the pup paused every few steps to be sure Eli stayed close. Its tail didn't wag. Its body didn't relax. It moved like a sentry on a mission. They traveled half a mile before the wind shifted, weakening just enough for a faint, broken sound to reach Eli's ears. A whine. He hurried. The pup dashed ahead to a collapsed rock formation and circled frantically. That's where Eli saw her. A full-grown German shepherd lay in the shadow of the rocks, her coat dulled by blood and dust. One hind leg was twisted viciously in the jaws of a rusted steel trap, the kind used by poachers. Illegal. Cruel. Unforgiving. She didn't struggle. She only watched Eli, eyes tired, but aware. The pup rushed to her, licking her ear, whining desperately. She groaned softly, too exhausted for more. Eli dropped beside them. Jesus. He reached into his duffel, pulled out his knife, and went to work. It took 5 grueling minutes to free her. The trap screamed open with a metallic creak. He ripped his uniform sleeve, wrapped her leg, and bundled both dogs in his emergency blanket. They huddled against him, trembling, seeking warmth, seeking survival. Brought me to save her, huh? He murmured. The pup curled against its mother, eyes still fixed on Eli. For the first time in months, warmth, not from the desert, not from duty, filled his chest. A warmth he thought he'd never feel again. Time bent strangely in the desert. Minutes stretched, then snapped back without warning, like heat waves in the air shifting shape. By the time Eli got the steel trap off the mother dog's leg, the storm had softened its roar, settling into irregular gusts. But the dust still clung thick in the air, gritty enough to coat their tongues and sting their eyes. Eli crouched beside the 2 dogs, sweat leaving thin trails through the powder that stuck to his neck. The emergency blanket flapped against the wind as he secured it more tightly around the mother and her pup. Her breathing was sluggish, too shallow. The kind of breathing that made Eli's chest tighten. Hey, he whispered, leaning close. You made it this far. Don't quit on me now. The pup pressed harder into his mother's side, trembling from exhaustion and cold. Eli had already named him in his head without meaning to. Dusty. He looked dusty. He smelled dusty. His whole little world, it seemed, was made of dust. But his spirit wasn't fragile, only his body was. Thin legs, oversized paws, a torn ear that looked like it had met barbed wire. And those eyes, sharp, resolute, refusing to surrender. Eli reached into his duffel and pulled out his metal canteen. The dent near the cap told 100 stories. He poured a small amount into the lid and held it near the mother dog's mouth. At first she didn't respond. Then her tongue flicked forward, barely catching a drop. That single moment gave him a breath of relief. But he knew the truth. He was too far from help. The ravine blocked radio signals, and no cell tower reached this forgotten sliver of earth. He scanned the broken canyon walls. The climb would be brutal. Nearly impossible with her weight and injuries. But leaving her here, even for an hour, could kill her. His heartbeat quickened, memories slamming into him. Mason. Rex. The world around him blurred for a moment, not desert, but Fallujah. Not wind, but collapsing concrete. Not silence, but the ringing aftermath of an explosion. Rex, his last military K-9 partner, had been more than a dog. A giant sable-coated shepherd with calm eyes and a fearless stride. They'd worked side by side for 16 long, dangerous months. Clearing compounds. Sweeping roads. Reading each other's breaths, movements, hesitations. Until their final patrol. A pressure plate buried shallow. Missed during the scan. Rex had taken point that day. Eli didn't remember the blast, only darkness, dust, and the absence that followed. There hadn't been enough left to bury. Eli closed his eyes, rubbing his face with a gritty hand as if he could wipe the memory away. Dusty watched him quietly, head tilted. Then, in a small, unexpected movement, the pup rose and walked to Eli, pressing his thin body against Eli's thigh. Not asking for help. Not seeking warmth. Offering it. Okay, Eli breathed. All right. You got me. He opened his trauma pouch, gauze, compression wraps, vet tape. He worked on the mother's leg again, this time with more focus. The wound was deep. Bad tissue damage. But not hopeless. If she made it through the next few hours, she had a chance. You're a tough girl, he murmured. I know you're kind. He'd started calling her Luna in his mind. Something about her, quiet strength, soft eyes, reminded him of moonlight pushing through a dark night. He looked up at the incline. It might as well have been a cliff. But Eli made his decision. He would not leave her. He stripped off his jacket and laid it flat, then searched the area for branches, dry, sun-bleached limbs from old scrub trees. He lashed them together with scraps of cloth and the emergency blanket, creating a crude sled. He positioned Luna on it carefully, wrapping the edges around her like a cradle. Dusty barked once, one sharp, urgent note. Hurry, huh? Eli muttered. I'm going. He grabbed the front of the sled and heaved. The weight nearly toppled him backward. Luna was all muscle beneath the grime, and the steep slope turned every step into a battle. His boots sank into the loose dirt. His breath came short and hard. Twice he slipped, once he nearly fell back down the incline. But each time, he planted his feet and kept going. Dusty stayed beside him the whole way, panting lightly, pacing anxiously. Nearly an hour later, Eli hauled the sled over the final ridge and collapsed to one knee beside the Humvee. His heart hammered. His arms trembled violently. But he'd done it. You better be worth all this effort, he rasped, glancing at the pup. Dusty wagged his tail exactly once. Eli opened the Humvee's rear hatch and cleared out gear until he could lift Luna inside onto folded blankets. He left the hatch open for airflow. Dusty climbed in beside his mother, half curling around her in instinctive protection. The wind finally eased, leaving a strange, heavy quiet over the valley. For the first time in too long, the silence didn't feel punishing. It felt present. Like something was shifting. Eli rested his forearm against the Humvee's frame, catching his breath. In the space between desert gusts, he could hear Luna's breathing, shallow but steady. Dusty kept his gaze on Eli, tail thumping softly against the blanket. "You did good," Eli whispered. "Real good." The sun began to peek over the ridge, washing the desert in pale gold. Shadows retreated. The world brightened. Then something caught Eli's attention. Tracks. He knelt in the sand near the ravine entrance, boot prints, not paw prints. Deep impressions. Heavy man. Pattern repeated. Intentional steps. Someone had been near Luna. Someone strong. Someone trained. And the prints were fresh. His jaw hardened. His breathing slowed. These weren't remnants of an old trap line. These were recent. He straightened and returned to the Humvee, reaching under the dashboard for his backup comms unit, an old satellite radio with duct tape on one side. It sputtered, then clicked to life. "This is Staff Sergeant Eli McCabe requesting emergency response at Grid PV-14A, Painted Valley. Injured German Shepherd, female, critical condition. Possible active poaching operation. Requesting immediate support. Over." Static. Then a crackle. A woman's voice, crisp and steady. "Copy that, McCabe. Response team en route. ETA 35 minutes. Hold position." He shut off the radio and exhaled. Behind him, Luna stirred faintly. Her eyes opened, just enough to see him. Eli moved to her side, crouching down. "I think I'll call you Luna," he whispered. "Soft, quiet, but strong. Just like you." Dusty sniffed Eli's wrist, then lifted his head sharply. His ears pricked. Something in the air shifted. Not wind. Not sand. A scent. Danger. Dusty stood, body stiffening, eyes locked on the clearing beyond the Humvee. Eli followed his gaze. Shapes approached, low, slinking, moving with predatory precision. 4, maybe 5 feral dogs. Ribs sharp, eyes wild. They weren't wandering. They were drawn by blood. Eli reached for his sidearm, then remembered it was in the Humvee's console. Dusty stepped forward, placing himself between the threat and Luna. No bark. No whine. Just a low, growing growl. Luna lifted her head weakly and released a hoarse warning. The pack froze. Watched. Considered. Eli stepped out slowly. "Not today," he murmured. He locked eyes with the lead dog, a scarred black mutt with one milky eye. The animal growled, but after a tense moment, turned away. The others followed, melting into dunes like shadows dissolving. Eli finally breathed again. Dusty returned to Luna's side, trembling slightly but refusing to lie down. Eli rested a hand on Dusty's back. "You held the line," he whispered. "That's what brave dogs do." The rising sun cast long beams of gold across the dunes. In the quiet distance, the faint hum of an engine drifted toward them. Help was coming. But so was something else. Something darker. Something patient. Eli didn't know what yet, but the tracks in the sand were a warning. And the desert never warned without reason. The desert had finally stopped raging. What remained was a heavy, wool-like quiet that settled over everything, thick, unmoving, almost suffocating. The Humvee sat hunched under the bluff's shadow, its tan frame buried under layers of dust from the storm. It looked less like a machine now and more like a tired animal waiting for shelter. Inside the rear hatch, Luna lay wrapped in the blankets Eli had salvaged. Her breathing came slow but rhythmic. Dusty stayed curled at her side, head resting gently on her neck, though his ears never relaxed. He wasn't sleeping, he was guarding. A few paces away, Eli crouched over the sand, eyes narrowed at the boot prints he had studied earlier. Now, in the clearer morning light, the tracks were impossible to ignore. Deep, wide, heel-heavy. A large man. Someone deliberate. Someone who knew these grounds well enough to move with confidence. The prince circled the trap site, then cut west toward harder rock where the trail vanished. Whoever set that trap had done so recently that the storm hadn't erased the evidence. Eli rose slowly, jaw tense. Someone had been hunting here, and not the type of hunter who used clean shots or humane tools. He returned to the Humvee, climbing into the front seat. He reached beneath the dash again and pulled out the old satellite radio. It was a clunky relic patched with duct tape, but it worked where cell towers failed. He tuned it, pressed the call button, and repeated his earlier transmission: injured shepherd, poaching confirmed, potential threat. The line crackled again, then a familiar voice responded, steady and clipped. Copy that. Response unit inbound. Eli lowered the radio and exhaled, staring across the endless dunes. He didn't trust the quiet, not anymore. Behind him, Luna shifted. He turned, stepping back to the open hatch. Her eyes were open, not fully, but enough to meet his gaze with a glimmer of awareness. Dusty perked up immediately, brushing his head against her chin. I think Luna's a good name for you, Eli murmured. Something strong behind something soft. Luna blinked slowly, accepting. Dusty snuffled at Eli's hand, then froze. His ears shot forward, body stiff. What is it? Eli whispered. Dusty wasn't looking at him. He was staring past him. Eli turned. Shapes moved on the horizon, small, weaving shadows shifting between the brush. Not the feral dogs from before. These shapes were different. He tensed, but as the figures grew clearer, his breath eased slightly. A jeep. Military issue. Dust kicking up behind its tires. Relief washed through him, until he recognized the posture of the driver. A woman in desert fatigue stepped out before the vehicle had even fully stopped. Corporal Tessa Raines. Compact. Precise. Sharp as a blade on a cold morning. She didn't wait for greetings. You were supposed to check in every 3 hours. Her tone held accusation but also concern. Radio got eaten by the storm. Didn't know they'd send you, Eli replied. I wasn't sent, she said, brushing past him toward the Humvee's open hatch. I came because your last signal cut mid-transmission. Dusty lifted his head, watching her cautiously as she approached Luna. Tessa crouched beside the wounded shepherd and inspected the wrapped leg with surprising gentleness. Her fingers moved with the precision of someone who had done this far too many times. How long has she been like this? She asked without looking up. 3 or 4 hours. Trap wound. Jaw clamp. You stabilize it? Best I could. Tessa checked Luna's gums, eyelids, and pulse. Her expression tightened. She's dehydrated. Going into shock. And this leg, she inhaled sharply. This is bad, Eli. I know. Dusty shifted closer, placing himself partly between Tessa and Luna, not aggressive, just protective. Tessa acknowledged him with a faint nod. Smart pup. Not just guarding her, he's reading us. He found me, Eli said. Pulled me across the ravine to her. He led you. Her brows lifted. Instinct like that, that's rare. She returned to her jeep and brought back a compact medical kit. While she drew up saline fluids, Eli watched her move. She wasn't rushed. She wasn't panicked. She was focused, almost eerily calm. Eli had heard once that she'd been in veterinary school before enlisting. He didn't know the story behind why she left, but he was about to. You're good at this, he said. Was supposed to be a vet, she answered quietly. Life took me somewhere else. Why'd you leave? Tessa hesitated, just long enough for him to know the truth hurt. My brother died. Hunting accident. He was 11. I was 13. Someone left a coyote trap near our barn. We were looking for our dog. Found the trap instead. Eli glanced at the scar on her wrist, thin, white, almost invisible in daylight. You got that then? Trying to free our mutt, she whispered. Nearly lost my hand. My brother, lost more. Dusty approached her, sniffed her wrist, then sat down politely, watching her. She blinked. Well. That's approval. He doesn't do that for everyone, Eli muttered. A gust of wind swept across the bluff, stirring sand into loose spirals. We can't wait here, Tessa said. Medevac can't land anywhere near this terrain. We need cover and signal range. There's a rock overhang about 100 yards west, Eli said. I've camped there before. Together, they gathered broken branches and spare gear, building a crude lean-to beneath the overhang. It wasn't pretty, but it would shield them from the heat that would soon hammer the valley. They lifted Luna on the makeshift stretcher Eli had crafted, Tessa guiding the sides while Eli bore most of the weight. Dusty walked beside them, never more than 2 feet from Luna. When they finally set her beneath the tarp, Luna gave a quiet groan, fatigue weighing heavy on her. She's strong, Tessa said softly. Most dogs fade before they let a pup protect them. Eli nodded, sitting back. You could have left her, Tessa murmured. Most would have. I couldn't. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. Tessa leaned against a rock, rolling her shoulder. How long have you been out here? 5 days officially. Longer unofficially. You do this often? Find trouble in the sand? Most days, Eli said, his voice quiet, I can barely save myself. For a moment, Tessa's expression softened. Same. As the sun climbed higher, the heat became a physical weight pressing down on them. Dusty finally settled, lying close to Luna, eyes still watching the horizon. Eli stepped outside the shade, scanning the ridgeline. This valley's wrong, he murmured. Those traps weren't old. Someone's been working this area. Close to base. Tessa didn't question him. She simply checked her weapon and said. Then we stay ready. The desert said nothing back. But it was watching. And somewhere beyond the dunes, so was someone else. By midday, the painted valley sky had transformed from soft morning gold into a punishing sheet of white. Heat shimmered over the land, distorting the horizon like melted glass. The rock overhang where they'd taken shelter offered shade, but only barely. Every gust of wind carried the scorched scent of desert, the kind that dried your throat and made your heartbeat echo inside your ears. Eli knelt beside Luna, adjusting the last of the clean cloths around her injured leg. Her breathing had grown weaker. Each rise and fall of her chest came more slowly than the last. Yet her eyes, when they opened even for a sliver, still carried that quiet resilience he'd seen from the beginning. Dusty sat upright beside her, his slender body rigid with vigilance. His ears flicked at every shift of sound, wind brushing through dried brush, a pebble rolling under heat, Tessa's boots crunching lightly as she exited the jeep. The pup looked bone-tired, but sleep wasn't an option for him. Not yet. He watched everything with a soldier's intensity. Tessa tossed a bottle of water to Eli. We've got maybe 2 hours before this shade disappears completely, she said. Signal's still dead. They must have rerouted the recovery team. Too long, Eli murmured. Her gaze drifted to Luna, and the worry in her eyes deepened. If her vitals drop any further, she won't make it through the heat. Eli stood, wiping sweat and grit from his forehead. Then we move. They constructed a sturdier stretcher, this time using the remaining tarp and scavenged pieces of wood from the dry wash. Eli lifted Luna with slow precision, making sure not to jar her leg. Tessa steadied the corners. Dusty followed without being told, walking beside the stretcher with an alertness far beyond his age. Every few steps he'd glance back at Luna, reassuring himself she was still there. Eli led them up a narrow trail he knew from old recon routes. It snaked along a slanted ridge, then curved into a canyon that offered longer shade. The climb was tough, loose gravel shifting under their boots, each step a battle against slipping. They hadn't gone 20 minutes before Dusty stopped dead. His entire body locked. Head lifted. Ears straight. One paw suspended mid-step. Eli froze. Tessa froze. The desert itself seemed to hold breath. And then, a sound cracked the stillness. A gunshot. Distant, but clear. Sharp. Like metal splitting the air. Tessa dropped instantly behind a jagged stone. Eli ducked, gripping the stretcher's frame hard enough that his knuckles went white. Dusty barked, a single, fierce note, then returned to Luna's side, body low and bristling. North slope. Rifle fire. A single shot. Not a warning. A threat. "We're being watched," Eli murmured, voice steady despite the tension knotting his chest. Tessa drew her sidearm, her posture controlled but tense. She aimed toward the ridge's curve and fired one round into the air. The sound echoed off the canyon walls, but no answering shot came. No voice. No movement. Just that eerie, suffocating desert quiet. Eli swallowed hard, memories clawing their way to the surface. Another ridge. Another patrol. Afghanistan. 2010. Dry earth. Heat. Dust. A bend in the road, and then the explosion that took Sergeant Langley before the rest of them could even hit the ground. Rex had barked seconds before the blast, saving Eli's life. Saving 2 others. But not Langley. Not himself. Eli clenched his jaw. "We don't stay here," he said. "We'll get pinned." Tessa nodded sharply. "Pull back." They turned, choosing a lower route carved into the canyon wall. The terrain was rougher, shale slipping beneath their feet, the angle steeper, but it concealed them from the ridge. Dusty resumed his lead, not hesitating once despite the danger. Tessa watched him thoughtfully. "You ever see a pup move like that?" she whispered. Eli didn't answer at first. "He moves like he's trained," he finally said. "No wasted steps." "You thinking the same thing I am?" "I'm thinking someone's running traps inside a military perimeter," Eli muttered, "and they're willing to fire at rescuers." She shook her head. "I meant the dog." Eli glanced at Dusty, who was standing statue still at the next bend, ears scanning the distance. "Yeah," Eli said quietly. "I'm thinking he's not just a stray." They continued downward until they reached a rocky saddle formation, a natural depression in the canyon wall. There they paused, propping Luna gently in the shade. Tessa pulled out a compact pair of field binoculars and scanned the ridgeline. Her breath hitched. "There," she whispered, pointing. "See that glimmer? That's glass." "Scope?" Eli asked. "Possibly. Could also be a camera lens. Either way, he's still watching." Dusty didn't lie down. He stayed pressed against Luna's side, eyes fixed on the direction Tessa had indicated. His body was trembling, not with fear, but with readiness. Eli crouched beside him, lightly touching the torn edge of one ear. "You saw him before any of us," Eli murmured. "Rex used to do that." Dusty didn't turn his head. Didn't flinch. He was locked onto the unseen threat. "You ever see a dog act like this?" Eli asked quietly. "Just one," Tessa said. "A mine detection K9 in Kandahar. Saved 5 soldiers before the 6th blast took her down." Eli's hand drifted from Dusty's ear to his narrow chest. He felt the heartbeat, rapid but determined. "I'm calling him the Sentinel," he whispered. "He's earned it." Tessa didn't smile. But her eyes softened, just a flicker. They stayed under the outcrop for half an hour, reinforcing the tarp overhead to keep Luna shaded. Dusty didn't rest, not even for a second. His gaze swept the canyon constantly, a tiny soldier guarding his wounded mother. When Tessa finally lowered the binoculars, she spoke in a low voice that carried an edge. "He didn't leave," she said. "Whoever fired that shot, he's still here." Eli nodded slowly. "He's waiting," he murmured. "But so are we." The desert wasn't silent anymore. It was listening. And somewhere in that listening stillness, danger crouched with patient, practiced intent. The Wildlife Medical Center at Sierra Junction felt like an entirely different world compared to the raw violence of the desert. Silence in the desert was wild, predatory, ancient. But silence here hummed with fluorescent lights and machines that blinked steadily like steady, reassuring heartbeats. Inside, everything was too clean: sterile tile floors, stainless steel counters, the faint antiseptic smell that clung to every corner. It should have been comforting, but to Eli it felt almost surreal, as if the world he'd come from and the one he stood in now didn't quite connect. Luna lay on a padded surgical table, her fur trimmed around the wound. And 4 fed hydration and pain control into her front leg. The swelling in her mangled hind leg was worse than ever, the skin darkening into mottled shades of purple and gray. She looked peaceful under anesthesia, but the sight twisted Eli's stomach. Standing beside her was Dr. Joan Navarro, a woman in her early 50s with streaks of silver in her tied-back hair. She wore navy scrubs under a utility vest and thin, wire-framed glasses that slid down her nose every few minutes. Her voice had a low rasp to it, not from cigarettes, but from decades of speaking gently to animals in pain. She had spent half her life saving creatures, the other half had been spent in the U.S. Army Veterinary Corps. She knew battlefield injuries. She knew what war did. She understood loss, especially when it involved K9s. "She's got fight in her," Navarro murmured, inspecting the wound. "But that leg, it's in bad shape. Bone fragments. Tendon damage. Nerve function is questionable. Can you save it?" Eli asked, voice low. "I can save her," Navarro replied. "But the leg may never work again. I'll do everything I can, though. She deserves that much." He nodded, jaw tight as he watched Luna's chest rise and fall in slow, steady waves. Through a glass window, Dusty lay curled inside a small observation room lined with rubber flooring and warm air vents. They'd tried giving him food, water, even a small plush toy. He ignored it all, sitting rigidly with his eyes locked on the door Luna had been taken through. Tessa stood beside the window, arms folded, fatigue etched into her posture. She'd traded her field uniform for cargo pants and a base-issued t-shirt. With her hair tucked under a simple black cap, and the scar on her wrist more visible under the clinic's bright lights, she looked younger, yet older, than Eli remembered. "He hasn't eaten since we left the ravine," she said quietly. "He won't," Eli replied. "Not until she wakes up." Navarro stepped out of the room, stripping off her gloves. "We're taking her into surgery now," she said. "I'll update you once she's stable." The door closed behind her with a pneumatic hiss. A long hour followed. Then another. Tessa and Eli barely spoke. Dusty didn't move at all. His gaze stayed locked on the surgical bay door like he could will it to open. Eventually, Eli stepped into the lobby for air. The facility backed into a low hillside overlooking utility roads and desert scrub. Several security cameras watched the property, one at the front gate, one pointed toward the southern path, another covering the parking lot. A blinking red alert caught his eye on the security monitor behind the desk. Motion detected. Time stamp, late last night. He leaned closer, tapping into the playback. The footage showed a dark figure moving along the east fence line, weaving through sagebrush. The camera lacked resolution, but the shape was tall, broad-shouldered. Hood up. Desert camo jacket. The figure crouched and unrolled something from his pack. A steel trap. Eli's stomach dropped. His breath froze. He scrubbed the video forward one frame at a time. The hood slipped just enough to reveal a jawline. A beard. Cold, pale eyes. Eli went still. Dwight Mororo. The name hit like a blow. For years ago, Eli had seen that same face across a courtroom. Mororo had been caught running illegal trap lines near restricted military land, razor wire triggers, steel jaws, no identification tags. It wasn't hunting. It was cruelty, and he enjoyed it. Eli's unit had arrested him while he was setting a trap. Eli had testified. The court gave Mororo a lenient sentence, too lenient. 18 months. Reduced to 12. And before leaving, he turned to Eli and whispered that what was taken from him would be taken back. Tessa stepped into the lobby and caught Eli's expression. "What is it?" she asked. He turned the monitor toward her. She inhaled sharply. "That's Mororo. Has to be." "Yeah." Eli's voice was low. "I could pick him out of a crowd of thousands. Those eyes don't change." "Why here?" she whispered. "Because I brought Luna here," Eli replied. "Because this place doesn't have armed guards. Because he thinks he gets a second chance." Tessa's jaw clenched. "You think he set that trap?" "He did." Eli didn't hesitate. Before she could say more, a soft sound caught both their attention. Behind the glass, Dusty had risen. His ears stood straight. Tail stiff. Head turned sharply toward the surgical corridor. Then Navarro's voice crackled through the intercom. "She's stable. Surgery's complete. She's sedated, but she made it." Dusty trembled, not in fear, but in relief. He sat by the door and waited, body locked in loyal expectancy. Eli's fists slowly unclenched. Mororo might be watching. But Dusty was watching too. The sentinel wasn't asleep. Dusty didn't budge from his post, not even when the hallway lights dimmed for evening rotation. His eyes stayed locked on the surgical door, chest rising and falling in tight, anxious breaths. He didn't whine. He didn't bark. He simply waited, silent, resolute, unwavering. Eli sat on a bench across from him, elbows resting on his knees, exhaustion tugging at every muscle in his body. But he didn't sleep either. His mind churned with images, Luna bleeding in the sand, Mororo's face on the monitor, the distant echo of a gunshot across the desert. Tessa leaned against a wall nearby, arms folded, gaze moving between Eli and Dusty. She looked as worn down as he felt. Finally, after what felt like an entire night compressed into a handful of minutes, the surgical doors hissed open. Dr. Navarro stepped out, pulling down her mask. "She's in recovery," she said. "The leg was worse than the scans showed. I repaired everything I could. But it's going to be a long road." "Is she gonna walk again?" Eli asked, his voice low. Navarro paused. "I won't say impossible. But unlikely. If she does, it'll be with a limp." Eli absorbed the news with a slow, steady breath. Dusty, however, didn't wait for further explanation. The moment the door cracked open enough, he squeezed in, ignoring Navarro's half-hearted attempt to stop him. Inside the recovery room, Luna lay on a padded mat, wrapped in soft blankets. A heating pad pressed gently against her side. Her breaths came shallow but steady. Her eyes were closed, stitched leg resting on a foam brace. Dusty approached her carefully, as if afraid she might break. He lowered himself against her chest, nudging her cheek with his tiny nose. Then he curled up right there, as close as he could get. Navarro sighed but smiled. "He can stay. I've never seen attachment like that in a pup so young." Eli stepped into the doorway to watch them. Something about the sight hit him unexpectedly hard, this fragile mother and her devoted pup, both survivors, both battered but alive. Tessa joined him, her voice soft. They're a pair, aren't they? Yeah, Eli murmured. They are. A soft buzz from Navarro's pocket broke the moment. She checked her phone, then stiffened, brow furrowing. Is something wrong? Eli asked. Motion alert, she said. South entrance camera. Eli's pulse sharpened. Show me. She handed him the phone. The camera feed displayed the rear fence. Dark. Still. Empty. But the alert log at the bottom showed trigger after trigger, each separated by seconds. Tessa's expression hardened. Someone's testing the perimeter. Or sizing it up, Eli said. Navarro exhaled sharply. This facility isn't built for confrontation. Which is exactly why Maroro chose it, Eli replied. Navarro shut off the feed. I'll alert the sheriff's office. But Eli shook his head. They're an hour out. Maybe more. He knows that. He'll move before they get here. Tessa's jaw tightened. So we keep watch. Eli nodded. All night. They took positions around the small building, 3 people against the possibility of one very determined man. Tessa secured the doors. Navarro double-checked the locks on the animal wards. Eli walked the entire perimeter twice, memorizing every corner, every blind spot, every shadow that could hide a threat. Inside the clinic, the lights dimmed into nighttime mode, casting long corridors in a dull, bluish tint. Machines beeped softly. Air vents hummed. And Dusty stayed curled against Luna, refusing to rest his head until hers shifted the slightest bit. Hours passed. Just past midnight, Tessa found Eli at the lobby window. You should get some rest, she said. Can't, he replied. She studied him for a moment. This isn't just about the dog, is it? Eli's shoulders stiffened. She didn't push. She simply waited. Finally, he said quietly, there was AK-9. Back in Helmand. Tessa leaned beside the window. His name was Rex, Eli continued. Golden coat. Smart. Loyal. He saved my life more times than I can count. And on our last patrol, he warned us. He barked, 3 sharp barks. His alert for explosives. But we didn't see anything. Not in the sand. Not on the path. Tessa swallowed. She knew where this was heading. We kept walking, Eli said. I was 3 steps ahead of him when the blast went off. He closed his eyes, jaw tightening. When I woke up, he was gone. Just gone. Tessa placed a hand on his arm, gentle but grounding. Eli, you can't carry all of that alone. I don't want Dusty growing up with that kind of ending, he whispered. And I don't want Luna dying because of someone like Maroro. Tessa nodded. Then we make sure she doesn't. She checked her watch. Let's swap patrols. But as Eli moved away from the window, a faint sound froze them both. A metallic click. Soft. Distant. Too deliberate to be wind. Tessa pulled her sidearm. Eli did the same. They crept toward the rear corridor, sliding along the wall. Navarro emerged from the surgical wing, eyes wide, instinctively stepping behind the counter. Eli signaled for silence. Another sound came, this time a faint scrape, like metal dragging on brick. Then a shadow passed under the crack of the back door. Tessa whispered, he's here. Eli readied himself, adrenaline flooding his system with cold clarity. The door handle twisted. Once. Twice. Then violently rattled. Navarro gasped softly. Dusty, hearing the disturbance from the recovery wing, growled, low and warning. Stay with Luna, Eli whispered, voice fierce but steady. Dusty didn't move. The door shook harder. A second shadow appeared beside the first. Not one man. 2. Eli's heartbeat thundered, but his training took over. He stepped forward, gun raised, jaw clenched. "Back away from the door," he shouted. "Now." Silence. Then a slow laugh seeped through the metal. A voice Eli recognized instantly. "You always were good at showing up where you weren't wanted." Mororo. His tone thick with malice. "We're taking what's ours," Mororo called. "One way or another." Dusty barked sharply, one single, clipped note. Not fear. Warning. A signal. A sentinel's call. Eli's eyes hardened. "You're not getting through that door," he said. "Not tonight. Not ever." The desert outside was pitch black. But danger wasn't waiting in the darkness anymore. It was knocking on the door. And Eli, Tessa, Dusty, and Luna were the only line between cruelty and survival. For a moment, the world shrank to the thin metal doors separating them from the men outside. Every light hum, every faint machine beep in the clinic vanished beneath the pounding tension in the air. Eli steadied his stance, focusing on the shadow under the door. Beside him, Tessa stood ready, feet planted, gun raised, breath controlled. She looked every bit the soldier she once was, the soldier she never truly stopped being. Navarro crouched behind a steel counter, trembling but focused, clutching the emergency radio. Eli glanced back at her and gave a small nod, one that said, "Stay low, stay quiet, we've got this." Down the hall, Dusty growled again, louder this time. The pup had positioned himself between Luna and the door to the recovery room, as if he understood exactly what was happening. Luna, still sedated, didn't stir, but her presence grounded him, fueled him. His small body was shaking, not from fear but from instinct, duty, something fierce and primal. The door handle twisted one more time. "Last warning." Eli barked. "Step away." Mororo's voice came through again, dripping with spite. "She's my property. Both of them. That might cost me a lot of money. And the pup. Rare bloodline. Worth more than you make in a year." Tessa's voice hit like a blade of ice. "Dogs aren't property. They're living beings. And you won't touch them." A beat of silence. Then. A deafening crack. A shotgun blast slammed into the door, blowing a fist-sized dent into the reinforced metal. Navarro screamed and ducked. Tessa jerked back, shielding her face from the flying fragments. The echo rolled through the clinic like a thunderclap. Dusty barked at full volume, high and sharp with panic. Eli grabbed the stretcher cart beside him and shoved it against the door, adding weight. Tessa followed, pushing a steel cabinet in place. A second blast hit, this time lower, near the lock. Sparks flew. The metal groaned but held. "He's trying to breach," Tessa said through clenched teeth. "No," Eli growled. "He will breach unless we change this." Navarro scrambled across the floor to the main lights panel. "I'm killing the interior lights," she whispered. "If he breaks in, we'll have cover." She flipped a switch. The clinic plunged into darkness. Only faint emergency strips along the floor cast a cold blue glow through the hallways, enough to see shapes but not details. Eli's vision adjusted quickly. Years of night operations had trained his eyes to read shadows like maps. Tessa breathed out. "Okay. We play this smart. If he comes in blind, we..." But she didn't finish. The back window, one room over, shattered. It exploded inward in a spray of glass and wind. Eli spun toward the sound. "He's splitting entry." Mororo's voice boomed from the darkness. "Told you. One way or another." Tessa moved first. "I'll take the window. Keep the door blocked." She sprinted down the hall, boots slamming against tile, vanishing into the dark corner. A second later, her voice rang out. "Drop the weapon." A scuffle followed. The thud of bodies. A grunt of pain. Two heavy impacts against metal cabinets. Navarro screamed again as something slammed against the wall in the next room. "Tessa!" Eli shouted. "I'm fine," her voice shot back, but strained. "He's not alone." Dusty's growl deepened. He crouched low, tiny muscles coiled like springs. "No," Eli whispered. "Stay with her, Dusty. Stay." But the pup wasn't listening. One more sound, an agonized cry from Tessa, and Dusty snapped. He bolted. Fast. Silent. A streak of determination shooting down the hall. "Dusty, no." Eli lunged to grab him but missed by inches. The pup disappeared into the shadows. Eli followed immediately, heart racing. Navarro stayed behind only because she had to. Luna was helpless in recovery. Eli rounded the corner and saw chaos illuminated by a flickering exit light. A second man, bigger than Maroro, was grappling with Tessa, pinning her arm against a counter. She fought hard, teeth clenched, but the man outweighed her by nearly 100 pounds. Maroro stood a few feet away, shotgun in his hands, swinging it toward her. Eli raised his gun. But Dusty reached Maroro first. The pup launched himself with everything he had, teeth flashing in the dim light, and clamped onto Maroro's pant leg. Maroro shouted, stumbling backward. "Get off me, you little." Eli seized the opening. He fired one shot. The bullet struck the shotgun, knocking it from Maroro's hands and sending it skidding across the tile. Tessa elbowed her attacker in the face, breaking free. She rolled aside, grabbing her fallen weapon. The larger man lunged toward Dusty. Eli fired again, aiming for the man's thigh. The bullet hit its mark. The intruder roared, collapsing to one knee. "Stay down." Eli barked. But Maroro wasn't done. He lunged at Dusty, reaching for him with clawing hands. "I'll break." Tessa fired. One clean, controlled shot. Maroro froze. The bullet didn't hit him, it buried in the wall beside his ear, a warning so sharp it sliced through the darkness. "Touch that pup," Tessa said, voice like a blade, "and I end you." Maroro hesitated. Dusty took advantage of the moment and sprinted back down the hall toward Luna's room. He didn't look back. Eli pressed his gun to Maroro's neck. "On your face. Hands behind your head." Maroro snarled but obeyed, chest heaving. Navarro appeared, breathless, clutching a first aid kit. "I've called the sheriff," she said. "Backup is on the way." The larger man moaned on the floor, blood seeping from his leg. Tessa stood over him. "I told you to stay down." Eli zip-tied Maroro's wrists and ankles using medical restraints, then secured the other attacker. Only once both men were restrained did he lower his weapon. His entire body shook, not from fear, but from the adrenaline wearing off. "Where's Dusty?" Navarro whispered. "In recovery," Eli said. He went back to Luna. They moved together toward the recovery room, stepping over scattered tools and shards of broken glass. When they reached the doorway, they saw him. Dusty sat pressed against Luna's stretcher, chest heaving, tiny body trembling violently, but he didn't leave her side. Not for a second. Eli knelt beside him and ran a hand gently over his head. "You're one hell of a little soldier," he whispered. Dusty lowered his head onto Luna's neck. Protecting her. Guarding her. Claiming her as his duty, his world, his purpose. Tessa leaned against the doorway, wincing at her bruised ribs. "That pup, he's got something in him I've only seen in one other dog." Eli looked at her. "Rex?" she asked softly. Eli nodded. "Yeah. Rex." Navarro exhaled slowly. "She'll need time to heal. And he'll need stability." Eli understood what she was suggesting long before she said it. You can't separate them, Navarro said. Not now. Not after this. They're bonded. Eli looked down at the pup, then at Luna's bandaged leg. He already knew what he had to do. Just then, a siren wailed in the distance, growing louder, drawing closer. Help was arriving. But Dusty had beaten them to the job. He had been the first responder. The guardian. The sentinel. And the night wasn't over yet. Morning didn't arrive with sunlight, it arrived with exhaustion. With the low rumble of sheriff vehicles outside. With EMTs loading two cuffed men onto stretchers, the larger one hissing through clenched teeth, Maroro glaring at Eli with a hatred that looked almost feral. The sheriff deputies ignored him, reading him his rights before slamming the ambulance doors shut. Inside the clinic, everything was quieter. The kind of quiet that follows a storm, heavy, sobering, but gentler than before. Navarro was giving her formal statement in the lobby. Tessa, bruised but standing tall, answered questions from two deputies who scribbled notes as fast as she spoke. Her knuckles were scraped, her ribs likely fractured, but she refused medical help until the situation was settled. Eli stood just inside the recovery room. He didn't speak. He barely moved. He just watched Luna breathe. The shepherd lay on a soft bed, for lines still taped gently to her foreleg, bandages wrapped firmly around her rebuilt limb. Her breathing had deepened, slow, steady, healing. Her ears twitched faintly at the distant voices and footsteps, but she didn't wake. Dusty was curled against her side, his tiny body finally relaxed. For the first time since Eli had found them in the desert, the pup slept deeply, no growls, no tension, no fear. Just calm. Eli let out a slow breath he'd been holding for hours. A soft knock sounded on the doorframe. Tessa stepped inside. Sheriff says they're booked. Maroro's not walking out of that courthouse this time. He shouldn't, Eli murmured, eyes still on Luna. He won't, she replied. Tessa joined him beside the bed. For a moment, they both just watched Luna and Dusty, two survivors who had endured far more than they should have. You ever think, Tessa said softly, that some souls get thrown into our path because we're meant to carry them the rest of the way? Eli nodded without hesitation. Yeah. I do. She leaned against the counter, wincing slightly at the pressure on her ribs. Navarro says Luna might wake in the next few hours. She'll be groggy, but she'll know she's safe. Eli swallowed. That's all she needs. And the pup? Tessa asked. Eli looked at Dusty, small, brave, loyal to the core. He'll stay with her, he said. Wherever she goes. They've earned that. Tessa crossed her arms. Navarro mentioned something else. Something about responsibility. Eli finally turned to look at her. You and I both know, she continued, that if Luna ends up in a regular shelter, she'll be split from him. They'll treat her leg as a liability. They'll treat him like a stray. Separate fosters. Separate lives. That can't happen, Eli said immediately. It won't. Tessa nodded toward the two dogs. Because you're going to take them. Eli blinked. Me? You, Eli. She said it without doubt, without hesitation. You're the only one they trust. You found them. Fought for them. Protected them. Dusty follows your voice like it's the only thing keeping him upright. Eli stared at his hands. I don't know if I'm, he paused, searching for the right words. If I'm the right person. You are, Tessa said firmly. You've been running alone for too long. Maybe it's time you stop. He didn't answer. So she stepped closer. You lost Rex. But saving these two. That wasn't just instinct. That was heart. You didn't freeze. You didn't hesitate. You acted. Her voice softened. Don't you think Rex would want you to do this? The mention of Rex hit deep, sharp but healing, like stitching torn skin. Eli exhaled slowly. Yeah, he whispered. Yeah, he would. Navarro entered quietly then, wiping her hands on her scrubs. She's stable, she whispered. And there's another thing. Her scans showed something I didn't notice at first. Eli straightened. What is it? She's pregnant, Navarro said softly. Silence filled the room. Dusty stirred at Luna's side, pressing closer as if he somehow understood. She's early in the pregnancy, Navarro continued. But the pups, they're alive. Strong. The trauma didn't touch them. Eli brought a hand to his mouth, overwhelmed. Tessa stared at Luna with something close to awe. She protected her pup, while carrying more. Navarro nodded. And now she'll have a safe place to bring them into the world. Eli looked at Luna, this battered, brave shepherd who had dug herself a bed in the desert sand to shield her unborn litter. Who had taken the blow of a trap to protect her living pup. Who had endured pain no animal should endure. And she lived. She fought. She survived. Tessa touched Eli's arm gently. Take them home, Marine. Eli didn't trust himself to speak, so he just nodded. Navarro smiled. Once Luna's strong enough to walk, we'll discharge her. Until then, come by any time. She'll heal faster with you two around. Eli stepped closer to Luna, kneeling beside her bed. Dusty's eyes cracked open, and the pup lifted his tiny head sleepily. Hey, Sentinel, Eli whispered. You did good. Dusty's tail thumped once, weak but certain. Eli rested a hand on Luna's shoulder. We're going home, he whispered. All of us. Later that afternoon, after the sheriff's vehicles cleared out and the clinic returned to its gentle quiet, Eli and Tessa stepped outside to get fresh air. The sun was lowering, painting the sky in striking bands of orange, violet, and gold. For the first time in days, the desert didn't feel like an enemy. It felt like a witness, silent, ancient, and somehow approving. Tessa glanced at him. So what now? Eli took in the horizon. I'm gonna take them somewhere safe. A place with room. Quiet. Rebuild their strength. And after that? He smiled slightly. I guess we'll figure it out. Tessa bumped his shoulder lightly. You won't have to figure it out alone. He looked at her. She didn't look away. A quiet understanding passed between them, one built on survival, trust, and something that might one day grow into more. They walked back inside together. Luna slept peacefully. Dusty never left her side. And somewhere deep within that room, woven between their breaths, stitched into their scars, something new had begun. Not an ending. A beginning. Born from pain. Forged in loyalty. Carried by courage. The story didn't end in the desert. It started there. With a shepherd who refused to give up. A pup who never stopped guarding. And a Marine who found, at last, something worth coming home to.